All right, if y'all can hear me again, what we're going to do is monitor the chat as we go along for today as well. Uh, my name is Justin Hansard. I'm the county agent here in Montague County. We'll have three presenters today, Dr. Ron Gill with livestock, Dr. Marcus Blum with wildlife, and then we'll have Kevin Perselis as well that will talk about some stuff at the end as well on this. Well, we just want to make sure everybody has opportunity to jump in. We will try again to monitor the chat what we can. If you feel like you have a question and if there's a little bit of downtime in between speakers or something, we'll try to get those answered the best we can as well. Again, we want to welcome all y'all that have jumped in on this meeting. It is being recorded, so that way if somebody needs to listen to it again, then we'll have it saved up, and maybe we can share that later as well. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. We'll try to keep muted the best we can. If we find some background noise, we'll try to mute that out as quick as we can as well. Our first speaker will be Dr. Ron Gill. He'll talk to us a little bit about livestock, what's going on, kind of where we're at. Ron, if you want to kind of take over, we'll let you.
I don't know how far back to start on this as to where we're at currently with screwworms, but it is a emerging issue. And as of this morning, there are, I think, 16 cases that have been found in the state of Texas over the last 30 days at least. 14 of them are still active. And there is a website that if you want to keep track of that, you can. It's called Screwworm.gov. It's the USDA dashboard is there that shows where these cases are and the current status of them. It also tells you what species these are being found in as well. So I'm going to skip through some of these slides just because I don't think we need to go back and talk a lot about the screwworm fly, but we will talk a little bit about it. It's not anything that we haven't dealt with before, and it is certainly something that we can deal with pretty easily. I don't know how I can get this to full screen. Anybody know? This is different than anything I've had to deal with on Teams. Anyway.
Honestly, Ron, it looks pretty good.
Okay. The life cycle on the screwworm is one that you kind of need to understand. The adult fly lives from 10 to 14 days on average. They'll start laying eggs about 7 to 9 days of age. And so we really don't have many control measures for the adult fly except what we call that sterile fly technique, where we try to get them to mate with the sterile male that we've released into the wild, and that keeps them from laying viable eggs. But if they are native flies, screwworm flies laying eggs, they'll lay those eggs on a wound of some kind. It doesn't have to be a big wound. And somewhere within 12 to 14 hours, those eggs will hatch. They'll start burrowing into the tissue in the larval stage, and they'll go through 3 instars in the larval stage. All of them eat flesh and bury into the wound. When they get to the 3rd instar and get through feeding, they'll drop out of the wound as a pupa and go into the soil. And so they'll stay in the soil until they emerge somewhere close to a week later when they go through that final stage. And then they develop it from that fly emergence into the adult again. So that's the place we have to actually treat screwworms is in that larval stage. You can't do anything with them on the pupal stage. The flies aren't really attracted to traps or anything else. Chemical control doesn't really work on them either. So the only place we have to chemically work on them is in that larval stage or preventing the eggs from establishing in the larval stage. So we just kind of need to understand how we can manage this life cycle. Where they're trying to work at the federal level is releasing sterilized flies into the environment that will mate with these adults, and that will prevent them from producing the eggs that are viable to create the larvae. And that's about the only way we can get anything done. So we'll talk a little bit more about the wound treatment in a minute, but the eggs will just appear look like they've laid them in rows there by the edge of a wound. It can be an old wound, a new wound. They can lay eggs into the same wound several times, and they can lay a lot of eggs in there too. So once again, you may not see the egg sacs, but if you do, you can actually scrape them off and crush them and get rid of them as well. But normally we'll find them in the larval stage as they're creating a wound. We always see these terrible pictures of screwworm infestation. There's a dog picture there at the bottom. The entire top of his neck has been eaten up with screwworms larvae, and it can normally kill something in 7 to 14 days. That's why we're encouraging everybody to inspect their animals every 2 to 3 days at a minimum. And I know that's very difficult for a lot of people, but if you want to do that and stay ahead of it, you're going to have to figure out some way to figure out what's happening in the herd in what we call the inspection phase. So make sure you're doing that. The pupa, and this is something, I'll just back up a little bit, misunderstanding in what's happening now. The only sterilized flies being produced right now are in Panama at the Copec facility there. What they'll do, they'll take them up to the pupal stage there. They'll irradiate them, sterilize them. Then they cool them down, and then they'll ship those pupa. Right now, they're shipping them up into Texas at that distribution facility on Moore Airfield Base. And then from there, they'll take them to these locations across the state where they're finding screwworms, let them go ahead and mature, and release the flies at that point in time. So the only access we have to sterilize pupa and flies is coming out of Panama, and we have to move them all the way from Panama to the U.S. right now to release them. And there may be still some of them being released along the border to try to keep more flies from coming across the border.
We started.
Yeah, it started at 9. I missed it.
All right. The other issue, we've had screwworms across the southern United States for a long, long time, and they're endemic in South America. That's why they never tried to get rid of screwworms in South America. And that's why we've always tried to hold them at bay down in the Panama region at the Darien Gap. It's a small land area that we can control, and it worked really well up until 2020 when things kind of got out of hand and flies started coming up out of South America. So anyway, that's kind of how we wound up getting started back in this problem. They've come all the way from South America to Texas in the last 6 years. We've had other outbreaks in the Florida Keys a few years ago. Still don't know how that happened. So it's always an issue we're dealing with and trying to get that done. I'm going to skip over that because that's not true. Current outbreak is in Texas now. So I'm going to go over here a little bit more to management considerations on the livestock side
I
of it.
put my boots on, honey. You want to listen to this?
One thing
turn
we
it
can
back
try
up?
to do, and if you would mute your microphone, please, if you're everybody can hear you if you don't. What are considered well-managed operations, whatever that means to a lot of people. In South America, if they're really on top of inspecting their cattle, treating any suspected cases, and doing any preventative maintenance they can, they have less issues with screwworms. And so anything they can do to control external parasites, internal parasites, grubs, anything else helps control the level of screwworm infestation you might have. And we have this saying we're using right now, inspect them, if you see anything you suspect is screwworm, collect that. We've got protocols in place to do that. And then do everything from a management standpoint you can to protect your livestock. And one thing a lot of people forget is the fact that we have historically calved in Texas in what we would call our spring calving is actually a winter calving, January, February, and March, or a fall calving season, November, December, January, somewhere in that range. And the reason that happened is because screwworms were so infective on animals born during the fly season. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But if we can have our calves in the cooler months when the flies aren't there, we're less likely to get umbilical lesions. And the primary spot screwworm flies like to get, about 80% of the cases, are actually in the umbilicus of newborns. And so if you are calving in fly season, you're going to have to really treat and inspect those umbilicus when we get screwworms in our area. So just keep that in mind. It's something we need to think about from a management standpoint. We can eliminate a lot of the potential infective animals on our operation by when we do some management practices.
Sir, what did you say the percentage was?
About 80% in South America are umbilicus.
Holy shit. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you asking. That's and that's surprising for a lot of people, and that's one reason we really encourage people, if they can, to eliminate summer calves, because they are going to be very susceptible to screwworm infestations when we get them in our area. The other thing you need to think about, we always see these big gross lesions on animals that are screwworms. When they're first infective, and I may have some pictures in this presentation, some cattle down in Panama, these just look like little pimples when they're first starting. So you may just see a little bit of bloody ring on an umbilical cord or navel flap of a calf. That's the start of an infestation. And so if we can get it at that stage, we can clean those wounds out and prevent these larvae from developing, dropping on the ground, and spreading and increasing in fly numbers. So everybody talks about, you can hear or smell a rotting tissue. That's only in cases that have gone untreated for a while. When I was young, we had screwworms in West Texas in the 70s. I do not remember them smelling bad. My dad used to talk about them being really bad in some sheep and stuff that it took them a while to find. So a lot of people really think everything's going to stink really bad, but it does not smell that bad when you first have an early infestation. So keep that in mind, and always inspect an animal as close as anything you see is a scrape or bloody discharge or fluid discharge. Look at it closer and make sure it doesn't have those larvae down inside it. We have collection tubes out. Justin, I don't know if you have any in your office. I know they've been distributed to the district offices or not. You don't have to have a specific collection device, but you want to collect as many larvae as you can in different sizes as well in a wound. So take some forceps, pick them out of there, put them in ethanol, isopropyl or ethanol based alcohol, and preserve them for identification from USDA. The reason to collect and submit is that if you have a case of screwworms, some people are not wanting to report because they get under movement restrictions, and the word used is quarantine. That's a bad word, but it's the official word. But a movement restriction means you just have to check all your cattle and have them inspected and or treated before they move. That doesn't mean you can't move them. So I hope the nonsense around not reporting goes away. That's important we do that, because if you have screwworms, you also get sterile flies brought to your property. And without sterile flies, we will not get rid of screwworms. So make sure you collect, submit, and report everything that you find. And if you do collect, that needs to go notify your veterinarian and or the Texas Animal Health Commission. They will give you instructions on how to get that submitted so they can be identified properly. Any kind of wounds you might have, ear tags are a notorious place for screwworm flies to lay eggs if they've got a raw spot there. Implant sites as well. In fly bites, horse flies, deer flies, they can cause problems, and there's not a whole lot we can do to control those. So what we can control are horn flies, face flies, that kind of stuff. Anytime you have a fluid secretion from an animal, whether it be blood or tear ducts or mucus, that fly can lay eggs in it. That's why we see so many infestations in the face and around the eyes on livestock as well. So it's not just blood that can attract these flies to lay eggs. It's just moisture in particular that allows them to get into some soft tissue. There are things on the market to treat with. I'm not going to go through a full line of these, but these aerosol sprays have been on the market. There's some more coming on the market as well. They are somewhat effective at killing these. It takes a while for the large larvae to die. And so if you clean out a wound, and that's something else I didn't talk about. If you have a wound, you need to get all of the larvae out of it. And that means digging them out. So that's never a fun process, but it's one that's necessary to get these things out of that wound. Don't leave them laying on the ground, assuming they're going to die. We're recommending everybody clean out around their chute. If you don't have concrete around your chute, put down some stall mats or something that you can see these things so they don't burrow into the ground and go through the pupal stage that way and create more flies. So once again, it's important we collect them all, get them out, kill them. If we don't submit them in that vial, they need to be dead on your property. And then we're talking about the larva at that stage. And there's a bunch of preventative
Ron.
stuff. Yes, sir.
Touch base on if they do have a suspect about not hauling him in a trailer.
True. Great point. Kevin brought up a point that if you have a suspected case, don't load them in the trailer and haul them to town. Don't haul them to the vet. Somebody needs to come to you, or you need to collect them on the ranch. You really don't even want to move them around the ranch that much, because anywhere that larva falls out and forms a pupa, you'll have more flies. So we want to make sure once we find a wound, we maintain it where it's at, kill everything in it, then perhaps move that animal to an area where you can retreat them later and do wound care. But make sure you don't transport them with larvae in a wound. And that's as simple as I can say that. Just don't do it. If you have any wounds, make sure you're fly repellent, treating them, closing them, inspecting them on a daily basis. If I've got a wound that I've created, think about that from a castration standpoint. It's pretty hard to see that. So we're going to have to be able to look up underneath animals to see if we have any problems. It's a challenge to inspect animals adequately to make sure we don't have an issue. And hopefully we don't let it get bad enough that it's obvious or smells rotten that we can then find it. I guess back that up. There is not a food safety risk. We say that all the time. There's nothing about a screwworm that's going to create a food safety risk. Where we might run into issues is some of the products we're now using to treat or prevent have a withdrawal period on them. So it's not going to be the screwworm that's the problem. It's the products we're using to control the larval stage of that screwworm that's going to be a problem. This just shows the normal fly activity and when you'd really want to try to avoid having susceptible animals, or that's why I said eliminate the summer calves and processing in the summertime, if at all possible, in the future, particularly if we get them up in our area. I'm going to skip through some of that. And that gets into, I'm not going to steal any Marcus's stuff there. So I'm going to see if I can get out of this now. I can't figure out how to get rid of the share screen now. Huh. Anybody
Hey,
have any
Ron, we
questions
might-
while I'm sitting here?
Ron, we might touch base about where people are branding. And it's not so
Yeah.
much to brand at this point, but when they peel.
Yes, sir. And the brand is it's just like any other process. You know, a fresh brand is not going to be an issue, but when it goes to peeling, it can be. And if you got any old brands that are, you know, I don't know what you call that, but it looks like they're proud flesh or have a scab on them, really big scab that every once in a while will get knocked off and peel and bleed a little bit. All of those are openings for screwworms. So an old brand that can be scuffed and opened up is a problem. New brands that are peeling. So once again, branding is something that needs to be reserved for uh, cooler times. Let's put it that way.
Hey, I got
Anything else
two
there,
quick,
Kevin, on that one? Or
I got two
Marcus?
quick questions, if you guys
All right.
second.
Yes, sir.
So what are we supposed to do about banding or cutting? Are you guys just suggesting we don't for now? Or I mean, at least if the worms or if the flies become an issue here, or what do you suggest on cutting and banding?
Cutting and banding needs to be done in the cooler months, or you just need to keep an eye on it. Keep wound treatment on it. And I know if you got very many of them to do, that's going to be an issue. That's why on ranches, for the most part, you try to castrate early. Banding is just as susceptible as knife cutting, and it may be worse because you have a wound there that lasts longer than one that's knife cut. So don't assume banding is going to be a way to go, because some of the early cases we found in Texas were actually in a banded goat, and the screwworm larvae were above the band. They had to cut the scrotum off, cut the band off, and then open him up to find the larva. So they were up in the body cavity of that goat. And there was no external signs that he had screwworms. And that was a problem. He just wasn't doing good. So the guy finally opened him up and looked inside him. So once again, it's a challenge. But if you're creating a wound, treat a wound.
Okay. My other question was, so we've been getting a lot of info on different treatment plans, but I've been looking up some of this stuff that they're recommending, and it is toxic as can be. Like, why are we recommending using these products? And is there a product that we can use that will not cause major issues? I mean, one of our local ranchers said they are using, the hell is it called? Negasant powder. And I Googled it, and it causes extreme neurotoxicity in all mammals. But for some reason in the USA, just gave it emergency authorization for use against New World Screwworm. Why would we do that? Why are we using those kind of products?
Well, you've got to have something that'll work, and that is a product that works. We can deal with the, and I'm not saying you have to use that. That's one option. If I remember right, it's a organophosphate powder, and it uses the levels they're using to treat wounds. It's probably not going to be as toxic as you would assume. But that's one reason we don't have it on the market in the United States, is because of the issues with it. But this is a unique situation where we need to get access to as many tools as we can, and then figure out what actually works. There's a lot of products that have a withdrawal period on them that's pretty long, partly because we don't necessarily understand how long it'll take to get out of the system. Exalt, one of them, I think they've changed it from cooler weather, it's 44 days, warmer weather, maybe 99 days. So once again,
So-
there's all sorts of issues with that. I may have that back at Kevin too. I don't remember.
Yeah, Exalt is 44 days when your temperature is above 60 degrees.
Above
If you
60.
fall
Okay.
below 60 degrees, you're going to go back to 98-day meat withdrawal.
Yeah. And
which
so
was not really that big of a deal. One thing to think about too, Ron, you might touch base, is where does that screwworm fly live? Not on the animal, but in the grass.
yeah, the screwworm fly, a lot of flies are attracted to surfaces or manure or whatever. This fly is not. They either live in trees or tall grass or something, um, but not in a surface that we can treat with some kind of fly spray and they land on it. Now, if a cow has been treated with permethrin sprays or with an organophosphate, even from that standpoint, if the fly stays on the animal long enough, it may actually get enough pesticide to either kill it or make it pretty sick. But so that's one reason we normally see an increase in need for external parasite control, because there is some benefit that fly gets on the cow, but it's not a major way we'd ever control the screwworm fly. So they're just pretty elusive. Pupa's in the ground, so we can't really do anything there. Did hear a few days ago that there is potential in some areas where you have fire ants that they may actually feed on some of the pupa. So that may be some of the best use of a fire ant I've ever heard in my life. So we'll see how that plays. But that's not going to be a major means of controlling, but it might cut down just a little bit. The map on the screen is where those cases have been seen and found, and the yellow spot is actually where the movement restrictions are. The blue area is where they're increased monitoring and they're looking for cases. And then even outside of that, they'll be looking for any potential. So anyway, you can pull these maps up, interactive maps from Animal Health Commission or USDA APHIS.
So
I know I'll say that again.
well, Ron, what I was going to say, you might kind of explain some of this. So if I want to go buy a bull, let's say in San Angelo, I found a Charolais bull, let's just say. So how am I going to do that? And what am I going to be expected from my side as a buyer and from the other side as a seller? What are recommendations, or what are they requiring, I should ask?
If you go to a sale, say in San Angelo, Tom Green County is under movement restrictions for the most part. So, for example, you would have to, well, if there's animals brought to the auction market out of an infested zone, they can only move there under inspection and release from Animal Health Commission. So if they get to the sale barn, they should have already been inspected, declared free, and moved to the barn. The barn is not going to be treating any animals, but they're not supposed to receive any that haven't been released out of those infested zones. If they're there, the bull is there, and you buy one of them, they're not going to have movement restrictions from there to your house that I'm aware of, because they've already moved there under movement orders. Now, if I were buying a bull out of that area, when I got him home, I would darn sure keep an eye on him to make sure that nothing showed up. We do everything we can to make sure there's not eggs on them, larvae in them, but it's still your responsibility to inspect them once they get, and keep an eye on them once they get to a free zone. So
my question, or going back to, and we need to be aware of this as buyers and or sellers. So if we're in a hot zone, that buyer has to have that animal inspected at least 2 days prior before. So I can't just run down there today, buy a bull from Joe Smith. I have to say, hey, Joe, we're coming on Saturday. So that way he has the time to get it inspected by a Texas animal health guy, because they're requiring, I believe, 2 days out. And so everybody's got to kind of plan ahead is what I'm trying to get to as well.
Right. And if you're buying directly from an individual, that'd be the case.
Okay.
If they want to sell you something, it has to be inspected and released by Texas Animal Health Commission, which I don't think you could do it quicker than 2 days. So I would leave at least 2 or 3 days to make sure that process is completed.
Ron, one thing we need to make sure that everybody understands that the products on the market, the Dectomax injectable, the Exalt, the Ivomec injectable, they work. But the biggest thing that everybody needs to understand, those products will not deter or prevent that female fly from laying eggs in a wound or discharge mucous membrane. It's not, they do not prevent that. All they do when we put them in the animal, whether it's Exalt or injectable Dectomax, is when that egg hatches and goes into that larvae stage and they start consuming flesh, that's what kills them in that 14 to 21 day window of those products. Their efficacy zone is from up to 14 to 21 days, but they do not prevent that fly from laying the eggs.
You're absolutely correct. That's the only way we can get product into the larvae is if they're feeding on the animal. And so the fly and the eggs have no impact on them, but once the larvae start feeding, you can. And that's why you have to be really careful and work with your vet to set up protocols. If you're going to try to, Ivomec's only good for what's the best way to say it, Kevin? If you got newborns, they're saying you can use Ivomec to treat that animal and prevent an infestation from setting up in a newborn. Now, there's also, I'll warn everybody, that's not 100% either. There's some failure on that as well. It is a good tool, but you cannot just use Ivomec and expect to not have any problems. And I think that's something everybody needs to get in their head, that
And that goes
none of these treatments
for
are 100%
Dectomax
effective.
injectable also.
Yes, that's injectable.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's not any of the generics. It is brand name Ivomec, the original formulation.
Yes.
Nothing has been tested on the generics. I would not use them for screwworm prevention. Same thing on Dectomax. There's a conditional approval on it for screwworms. Same formulation on Dectomax, but once again, it has to be used correctly for it to have any effect either. So a lot of people won't just keep animals on Ivomec. If you do that, we'll end up with a lot of resistance. There's already a lot of resistance to ivermectin products in Brazil, in particular, in Argentina. And these flies have come out of South America. So I'm not even sure how effective some of this will be when we get here, but it is a tool we have to use.
The other thing we got to make sure and talk about is using those products. Dosage is critical. So instead of, and these products cost money. So my experience over the past years I've been doing this is when I'm selling animals or talking to somebody that's going to sell their animals, they're usually about 100 to 150 pounds heavier from a guess weight versus if I'm there and they want to use a pour-on, Exalt, or an injectable product, they usually guess them cattle lower. You need to be very cognizant of using the correct dosage.
Okay. Underdosing will be worse than anything because you will create the resistance. So they always say use the upper limit on that dose for that weight. Don't skimp on it. And there is this list that they're pulling up right now are products that have been approved. One for individual wound treatment. There's a barrier on that. F10 is one that's been brought around quite a bit, and I think it will have certainly some benefit to preventing the fly from laying right there around the wound, but it's a, and the negusant you talk about is, it does have some side effects, but it may be better than a dead animal or the welfare issues created by not treating these animals. This is a unique problem. We don't have a lot of options for because of the way it affects itself, but we can't afford not to treat an animal from a welfare standpoint. We can manage the residue issues in an animal, allow the animal to recover if they get over the screwworm. If they don't, they may die. So if you don't find the product that works, there's not a whole lot we can do. It's unfortunately that's the case. Anybody have any other questions? Anything pop up in the chat or you want to put it in there or just unmute and ask?
I got a question. What would you guys, so if they show up, my thought was to combine my herds to go from 20 herds to 3 and just run like 120 group herds. Do you see a problem with bringing that many together? I mean, it would make life much easier for us to check them every day if we're not having to drive to 25 places. I know that puts a lot more animals in one area. I mean, there's pros and cons to both sides, but what do you think on that?
Well, I agree. There's pros and cons to it. I don't think bringing more animals together is necessarily going to attract more screwworm flies or anything like that. The thing you get into, the larger your herd is, the more difficult it is to inspect individual animals. And so even if you bring your herd together, you still need to look at every one of them. And that's where the benefit to having smaller groups is you can see them easier. So I'm not saying one way or another. It's just realize even in these quarantine zones and stuff, they are actually, you look at the big group to see if you see anything obvious, and then you got to break them down into smaller groups to do more individual inspection of those animals. So that would be my concern about getting really big groups together. But there's a, for example, all our 140 head in one group is not a big deal. Someplace running 4,000 or 5,000 head in one group. So if you do, it's just a challenge to see each one of them individually. And this is an individual animal infestation that we're dealing with. It's not a herd health issue that spreads across a large number. So that's my challenge with bringing bigger herds. Somebody else want to?
Well, and we also run, I have halter and I have the series tags. Halter doesn't do shit, but the series tags supposedly will alert us if they detect New World Screwworm. They'll send us an alert saying that something's wrong with the cow and to go check on it. But so those will help us out, but the ones with halter, they ain't gonna do nothing. But it does allow me to, even if I have them in big groups, I could cut them into 20 head groups and just keep them separated from each other while we check them, and then shut the collars off and let them go back together once they're done. But
as long as you've got a way to kind of look at them individually, figure out what works for you. Right now I'd probably leave them in your regular groups until we actually have an issue, and then
for sure,
then try to figure out what's going to work best for you.
Okay, and then what do you guys recommend in the foggers? Like, I don't really love the idea of spraying permethrin every couple of days, or I don't really like fogging permethrin because it's not getting on just the cow, it's covering my ground as well, so it'll kill any of the good stuff in my ground. I've heard some people are using like mineral spirits and apple cider vinegar. Is anybody using anything that's not a harsh chemical yet?
I've
done apple cider vinegar, and that only works for like 2 or 3 days max.
That's what we figured. We figured we'd have to spray every 2 days, but at least it's not harmful. If you did spray permethrin, how often are you spraying? Once a week, or?
Well, I wouldn't spray that often, but if you're getting good control, a lot of times ranchers would only spray once a month. Just anything to keep the fly population down. You'll have to figure out what that timing is on your place, because more intensive grazing may actually help and or hurt that. It just depends how it's run. If you put everything together but you're not rotating pastures, you're probably going to have more fly problems. And
Yeah.
so there's pros and cons to all that, and you just got to figure out what works and then follow the label directions on the product. We don't want to overuse any of these, because we're already seeing some resistance to permethrin. What we're trying to do with the external flies is not let them get so bad that they create a bloody spot that a screwworm can lay their eggs in. And so you just have to manage that best you can.
Ron, you might mention too, and discuss it just for a second here. We have some that have mentioned something about using diesel as a carrier as well.
Well, the back rubbers and that kind of stuff, a lot of them recommend you use diesel. From a beef quality assurance standpoint, we probably shouldn't be using diesel. We can use a vegetable oil, cheap vegetable oil, and do the same. Diesel absorbs through the skin and stored in the fat on an animal, so it's actually has some residue issues with. But the back rubbers and distributing fly control is certainly an option you probably ought to consider. It might be better than spraying. If you're worried about getting environmental contamination, that's more of a controlled application through back rubbers or oilers or whatever you might have. So once again, the carrier is the big thing about it, but the diesel part of it. But there's plenty of options out there for carriers for those products.
What about we have in the chat vaccination sites, where we go in and provide a vaccine in the neck or sub-Q or intramuscular? Is that going to be an issue possibly?
It can be. Once again, any practices you can control. And if I'm doing vaccinations, and I'm probably going to change my needles more often, because you'll notice after about 3 or 4 shots, sometimes you'll start having blood trickle out of an injection site where you might have a burr on a needle. So I would sure be careful to not do that. Don't create a wound unnecessarily. I don't know if I really want to address Cody's question, but I will. Will
It's been
ivermectin
talked
to
about
feed?
with that and wildlife, and that
Yeah.
brings up a good point. We really want to discuss that, and I know Marcus will talk a little bit about that as well. But go ahead, Ron.
Well, we've used ivermectin to feed for wildlife for the fever tick, and it does have some efficacy in that standpoint. I honestly do not see them giving approval for using ivermectin in the feed on a long-term basis or a short-term in livestock. Now, Kevin, you may have a different take on that, and if you do, that's fine. But it was very difficult to even get them to do that on wildlife, and they can only do it seasonally. They have to stop it during hunting season. So the residue issue gets to be a concern with ivermectin in the feed, and then to me also the resistance component. I think we'll see a quick resistance development if we use ivermectin in the feed, but
You're spot on, Ron, with that, because the problem with the feed is everybody's got to remember, for these products to do their job, we have to get the right amount, right dosage, right concentration in them to attain a certain blood level to be effective. So when you look at the ivermectin in the feed, we can't control the total, and have an exact dosage. we can guesstimate. We put tetracyclines and stuff in the feed for anaplasmosis and stuff like that. But that's antibiotic, and it's kind of held in there over a long period of time. But these products we put in Ivomec in the feed you just can't control the dosage.
Yeah, and I will bring this up because I've heard this asked before. Some people think they can use long range and control the screwworms. You cannot, because it is a pulse dose as well. That thing does not have a sustained release over time. And so you get the same thing Kevin was just talked about there. There's no evidence whatsoever that long range will control screwworms, and the way it works, it shouldn't. And so don't think that's going to be an option either.
And Sidectin injectable does not work either.
No, that's the other thing. The Sidectin product is not effective really in any shape, form, or fashion. So yeah.
So there's a question in the chat for the flies. How at what point for temperature, what degrees does it roll the flies back or limit their movement?
Well, just if you watch fly populations, once the weather cools off, fly activity really drops off quickly. Now, if it's just pulsing back and forth, you're going to have flies ebb and flow with temperature. But it does not take long once they're chilled down to really slow down fly activity. So the people here in North Texas will have a little break from flies, just like I would look at what happens to horn flies and face flies. When they're not active, screwworm flies will not be active for the most part. Now, if you think about further south of here, South Texas and Mexico and down through Central America, they do not have a time off. Flies are always active. And so there can always be incursions into these cooler areas from those warmer areas. But we'll see a decline in fly activity in the cooler months. I can't tell you exactly how quick that's going to happen, but if you'll just kind of watch the rest of the flies, you'll have a pretty good idea when activity will be lower.
Okay.
If the pupils are in the ground when the freeze comes, do they go dormant or do they die off and we have to wait for new flies to come our way, or will the flies that are in the ground reemerge once winter's over?
Well, they'll go dormant for the most part. Think about the way we're moving them from Panama to here is we cool them down so they stop developing. And so if the ground cools off, temperature drops, the pupa will slow its development, and therefore it can survive a winter and reemerge. There'll probably be some that won't make it, but some will.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question there, Matt. While we've got a chance, let's go ahead and introduce Marcus. I know y'all have several more questions, and Ron will be on this call, I guess, for the rest of the time as well, as long as Kevin as well. But let's get Marcus Blum, Dr. Marcus Blum. He's our wildlife expert out of the Texas A&M down at College Station. Get him to kind of jump in and start talking a little bit about wildlife. I know I've had a few phone calls on this, so it's another hot topic we want to cover as well. So Marcus, we'll turn it over to you.
All right, can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay, you see the screen good?
We can see it.
Awesome. Just wanted to check in case there's any technical difficulties. All right, I'm Marcus Bloom. I'm an assistant professor and extension wildlife
goes
specialist.
both ways on how she feels about priests and certain saints and popes and stuff.
Like that. Okay. Yeah, so I'm an extension wildlife specialist for the state. I'm based out of College Station, statewide duties. Don't need to go too much more in the introduction. I'll just jump right into this. I'm glad I'm following Ron on this because he's covered a lot of the introductory stuff, as well as the species that we can do stuff over. Now I'm going to jump into a little bit more challenging one. Well, I wouldn't say more challenging, it's different challenges. But yeah, so Texas is home to over 140 mammal species, and hundreds and hundreds of bird species, with over 5 million white-tailed deer alone in the state, and which are going to contribute about a $10 billion in total economic contribution to the state. In addition to that, we've got over 1 million exotic host stock of over 120 different species, that contributes probably 3 to 5 billion annual economic contribution to the state. And we're looking at feral hogs alone is probably closer to 4 million feral hogs in all but a few counties in that Northwest Panhandle, and then El Paso are about the only ones that aren't really affected, and those seem to change on a year-to-year basis, other than the El Paso County. So needless to say, we have a lot of potential animals out there that can harbor the screwworm infestation. So we get a lot of questions on white-tailed deer. This is our estimated deer population over time since like the late 1930s through about present. And these the red lines here. Let me see if I can turn my clicker to a pointer, just so you know which one. The first one here in 1962 is when we started releasing sterile flies in Texas. You can see where the population that is around 2 million white-tailed deer. And then when it was eradicated, stated that it was officially eradicated was 1966. And you can see our population approaching 3 million white-tailed deer. I do want to point out that there's a lot of other things going on at these times. I'm not saying that everything was associated with all these, or this increase was only associated with screwworm in the 60s and then since then, but it is undoubtedly had some level of impact on our white-tailed deer populations. And if it's affecting white-tailed deer, it's likely affecting all the rest of the wildlife as well. But yeah, so during this period of that, during that period, we could see a range of 20 to 80% mortality in some of the areas. Some of those really high numbers are more associated with drought years. So fawn crop, and that was for fawn crops. So up to 80% fawn crops are loss in a given year during screwworm infestation. So one of the things to keep in mind with wildlife is susceptibility to screwworm is going to vary by species. Now, I want to make it clear that doesn't mean that some animals are more resistant to screwworm just naturally, or through something about their like their inner workings. It's all about how much they fight, how injury prone they are. And within a specific species like white-tailed deer, there's going to be variation, susceptibility, things like activity patterns. Screwworm is more active during the day, so animals that are more active during the day are going to be exposed, whereas those that are nocturnal are less likely to be exposed. Locations, not all counties are going to have the same risk, and depending on the time of year as well. As Ron mentioned, with like North Texas, there's going to be a little bit of a break, whereas South Texas, there may not be as much of a break. When the breeding and parturition seasons happen, most of our parturition seasons are happening at poor times, going on right now. Parturition, that's when fawns are hitting the ground, calves, kids, whatever, pups, whatever you got out there, kittens. Yeah, if you're talking about bobcats. But yeah, so those are all pretty bad timing for screwworm infections. And then breeding seasons are going to vary. For most of our species, like white-tailed deer, it could be September through November into December. Just depends where you are. Not October through parts of December, depending on where you are in Texas. Age is going to impact things as well. Older males may be more prone to fighting because they're more competitive for females and some of your younger males. But yeah, so there's a lot of different things that go into susceptibility in our wildlife species and within those species in general, which makes it complicated. So Florida Keys was had a screwworm case. This was our most recent until lately screwworm infestation. So that was in the mid 2010s. And this impacted the Florida key white-tailed deer species, which is an endangered species of white-tailed deer. And so we had over 135, or we had 135 key deer mortalities associated with this infestation event, which is about 15% of the herd, which is a pretty big deal. Luckily, it hit the right portions of the herd, and I'll explain what that means here in a bit. But this is to show you like the pulses and mortality of white-tailed deer as they figured out they was screwworm. Basically, the first ones occurred in July 1st, but they didn't really know what was going on, and it wasn't until later once they figured it out, and that's when and you see this spike starting in mid-September through October. Then they bring in the sterile flies. And instantly drop it back down. The Florida Keys are pretty unique in the little island chain that it doesn't expand as well. It's not all this contiguous land like we have here in Texas, and flies don't travel across large bodies of open water. So it kind of kept it contained, and it was almost a best case scenario as far as dealing with the infestation with the wildlife species. But as you see, once they implemented the sterile fly technique, it just crashed the cases. It worked very, very well. And there was other things that they did as well, but this was the main reason. One thing to point out, that key deer do not rut at the same time as our deer in Texas. So I said like late October or mid-October through up to parts of December. In Texas, key deer are rutting during this period, that mid-September through October 15th. And so that's where you're seeing these increases in mortality. It missed the fawning season, which was good for them. But so why I'm pointing out that it was during the rut is because 92% of the total mortalities of white-tailed deer in that population were males. 8% were females. And of those males, 84% of them were mature. So what this means is that these mature males are the ones that were most impacted. And it makes sense, right? Because mature males, at least in white-tailed deer, and most of our like hoofed mammal species, and mammals in general, they're the ones that are fighting the most aggressively for access to mates. Your younger males, they just, I mean, like when we're watching, if you're a deer hunter and you've watched young bucks from your stand, and in early winter, you'll notice that they're mostly just sparring. It's not nearly as serious. Those big bucks, when they start going, I mean, it's serious bouts. So they're much more prone to injury, and that's why we likely saw an increase in mortality in those males, those older males. Luckily, it missed their birthing season, so they didn't have much from a fawn and female mortality and die off. But the males got hit pretty hard. So how does that translate to Texas? So just in large mammals in general, or wildlife in general, female mortality is going to be really important for maintaining populations. In species like white-tailed deer, females, a decrease in female survival can have really strong negative effects on the population. These species rely on high adult survival, and when you start to see decreases in adult survival, they can decline quickly, especially if they're not having recruitment, and the recruitment meaning young turning into breeding age. So if you're losing fawns from screwworm, and you're also seeing females die, you're going to have an issue. And again, adult survival is typically very high in most of our whitetail and most of our wildlife species, or mammal species in general. And then, of course, we're likely going to see a decreased mature male survival, just because it does seem to impact them a little bit harder because of their fighting styles. You can see in this picture of these bucks fighting, that wound that's likely caused from a fight at some point. But again, it's not just a deer problem. This is going to impact a lot of species. Not all of these species are ones y'all are going to deal with in that part of Texas, but I like to try and go over some examples. Collared peccary, also known as javelina. They have those really sharp teeth, and yeah, they're prone to fighting quite a bit, so they're likely to be heavily impacted. Bighorn sheep had die-offs in West Texas associated with Mycoplasma pneumoniae. Luckily, their fighting styles don't lead to as much from an injury standpoint, that headbutting, and more of a circular horns. But then you've got pronghorn further west of y'all, have had struggles in some of their ranges that could be susceptible. Turkey, they're warm-blooded as well. Predators, they have a, while not always thought of in a positive light, they do have a positive role in in some of our systems. And then feral hogs. I get a lot of questions on feral hogs. Feral hogs, um, there's like this rumor going around that they're going to basically be immune to it. I don't see that being the case. Uh, if you've shot feral hogs or managed them in any way, you know that they're constantly covered in cuts and banged up. They're always fighting. They fight year round because they can breed year round. So they're always fighting for mates. They're just fighting for each other over food. Within their sounders, they're always cut up. Sure, they can go and wallow in mud. I've shot probably thousands of feral hogs at this point in my life, and very few times have I found to where they're just completely covered in mud. So I don't think that that's going to make them less susceptible to infestation. If anything, our 3 to 6 potentially million feral hogs are just going to be another way to harbor New World screwworm on the landscape. So what can we do? Now this is where it gets kind of where it's challenging for us. There's not a lot we can do. So I'm going to first say surveillance is the big thing from wildlife. That's what Texas Parks and Wildlife and others are asking for hunters and those, just any landowners, just the public in general, monitoring wildlife as much as possible, to see if we have any suspected cases. Unfortunately, this is challenging. We can't just pull out a bag of cubes and drive through the pasture, or go and just drive around, do our normal checkups with livestock. With wildlife, they're trying to hide from you. They're running away. They don't want to be around you for the most part. I guess unless you live in like Wimberley or something like that, where they're basically tame whitetail there. But yeah, it's challenging. So I recommend that people, if you have a ranch and you keep a notebook for cattle or sheep and goats, whatever you have. I do the same thing for wildlife, or start making notes of wildlife. And especially if you see anything, because if you see something, you need to report it to Texas Parks and Wildlife ASAP. In addition to just being vigilant on the landscape when you're driving around and on your property, but also utilizing technology like trail cameras. That's going to be a really big one. Having people may not have trail cameras up right now just because we're still not sure. Most people are putting it in later to when velvet's almost fully mature. But at this point, it'd be good just to have it. It's more about monitoring animals on the landscape and seeing if we can detect any screwworm or potential injuries across our population, and so that we can get sterile flies into the areas. One thing to keep in mind, if you have supplemental feed, like protein feeders or corn feeders, a lot of times we'll put pens around those to keep feral hogs out. One thing you may keep in mind is, so if we have cameras on those feeders, like good, well, we can monitor those deer, but we're not monitoring the fawns because the fawns aren't getting into through those hog panels. So maybe lift those hog panels up 6 inches to a foot so that fawns can get in there. I know it defeats the purpose from the feral hogs, but it's really important that we monitor our fawn populations as well. Conducting wildlife surveys, just hunting all this up, just any way you can monitor animals is going to be important. And again, we can't, so unfortunately, we can't like with livestock, we can alter when we're breeding, when we're calving, when we're kidding or lambing. But with wildlife, we just can't do that. We can't change the season, so we're stuck with what we have. So we're just, it's going to be important to increase vigilance and surveillance during periods like early, shortly after bucks drop their antlers, that January through February, or that February period when they start growing again. They can be susceptible during velvet, although deer are pretty good about not getting their velvet all messed up and scratched up. But again, the wounds can be small, so it doesn't take much. Those parturition periods, so that may, depending on where your property is, that June, July is going to be a big peak. And then, of course, during the rut period. And then all wildlife is going to be reported to Texas Parks and Wildlife. So if you find anything, you can use this little QR code to find your wildlife biologist. If you just go in Google, type in Texas Parks and Wildlife, find a biologist. You can find the biologist for your specific county. But they're trying to get all the information, any suspected cases, to wildlife biologists so they can bring it up, elevate it to the wildlife health staff, and coordinate with USDA about fly drops. So as far from a management standpoint, again, there's no treatment here for wildlife. If you have captive white-tailed deer, there are treatment options. You got to get with your vets, your local vet or the vet that you already have or use for those operations. If you have captive animals, I would consider a lot of the same things that Ron just went over. If you're doing ear tagging, if you're anything that you're doing that could cause an injury, branding, ear tagging, whatever it is, dehorning, move it to make sure you're doing stuff in the winter months. If you're doing capture and movement of animals, capture is just, they're prone to get some type of injury during that, regardless whether you're using a dart gun or running them through chutes. And there is the potential. So do your best to do that in the cooler months. As far as other management and how we should adjust management in general, first and foremost, Texas Parks and Wildlife is our regulatory agency for native wildlife in Texas. Texas Animal Health Commission will handle your exotic wildlife. But so they are the authority here. And there's a lot of different management programs that you can get involved in that you should, if you're not involved in already, at least from a whitetail deer management standpoint, I recommend you do so. Things like Managed Land Deer Program, Landowner Assistance, and Technical Guidance Program. And I recommend those because that allows you to get a personal relationship with your biologist, and they learn your property, and they can help you adjust any of your management techniques if and when screwworm were to hit your area. And if you haven't started keeping records, you need to start. It's hard to make adjustments to how you need to manage your wildlife populations if you don't know what was going on before screwworm hit the area. So join those MLDP programs or just start monitoring in general, especially like your recruitment rates if possible. Keep a contact list. The Texas Parks and Wildlife, again, your local biologist, Texas Animal Health Commission, the regional offices. And as far as like record keeping, what you want to really keep track of, population size is a big thing. So keep track of the number of bucks and does and fawns that you're seeing. You want to monitor that buck to doe ratio to see if you're starting to have less or more does to less bucks, and if you're having bad recruitment with your fawn to doe ratio. Age classes to monitor if you're losing some of your older males, etc. As far as your cameras and the surveillance, this is a great population monitoring tool and just surveillance in general. I would recommend putting them at feed sources or water sources. Also, any trails that get a lot of use, those are going to be really, really beneficial. If possible, you can have 2 cameras like on a trail set on each side of the trail or on each side of a feeder pen for feeders. But not everybody has the ability to do that So one should be fine. You're going to want them at least about 2 to 3 foot off the ground and about 10 yards from a source. So whatever, if it's the feeder, if it's a trail, and that'll give you a good visibility of animals. I'd set them at 3-shot bursts with a 10-second delay. You can put it to video. Just keep in mind you're going to be changing batteries a lot more frequently, especially this time of year, or if you're increasing the amount of time the camera's on landscape. So also consider like solar panels and things like that. Once you got all your population information, make sure you work with your Texas Parks and Wildlife biologist to kind of see what you're seeing on the property, and make sure that you can set proper goals to manage your animals correctly. If possible, not all of these things are feasible depending on your property size, but reducing areas of congregation can help. Reducing risk of injury, that's really tough in a species that can't be controlled naturally very easily. But maybe around feeder pens. So say you don't have hog panels and you have barbed wire, maybe replace it with slick wire. Just try and do what you can. These are small things. Again, wild animals are more likely just to get injured in doing natural things in the wild. So it's frustrating, but it is what it is. We're just stuck with what we have in a lot of ways. Predator management, I've been asked about that quite a bit. I think it can be effective. So if New World Screwworm is really hurting our fawn crop, maybe just trying to reduce the amount of predation pressure that fawn crop has can be beneficial. But if you're going to do that, I would wait to no more than a month before and throughout the breeding or the fawning season to target predators. It may or may not work, but it's just something you can add to your toolbox. And finally, adjusting harvest. So adjusting harvest. So if you're starting to see a reduction in your doe numbers, well, maybe we need to pull off doe harvest for that year. Again, these are conversations that you should ultimately have with your Texas Parks and Wildlife local biologist, because they'll know your area better than someone who's 200 miles away. But also consider, like, okay, well, you're seeing fewer and fewer mature males. Maybe you don't let a buck that you might have previously let live another year. It's like, well, you make the decision, like, do I want to chance that? Do I want to harvest him earlier? I'm not saying kill all your mature bucks by any means. You definitely want to, but the bucks ultimately, they're not the ones driving the populations. It's the females. So females we need to be really protective of in the instances where it's really needed. And it's not all populations are the same, right? It's very, very site specific. Some populations could use a reduction in deer density, although we don't want it wiped out, which screwworm shouldn't wipe out anything. Whitetail persisted just fine with screwworm before. They'll do it again until we beat this. As far as carcass inspection and removal, and this should be my last slide. First off, you harvest a deer, come up to the carcass, and you suspect it has New World Screwworm, give your local biologist or game warden a call. If you have a screwworm infection, then this is the Texas Parks and Wildlife's recommendations. Put the carcass on a plastic or a hard surface there at the site. Don't move it. Keep it there. Collect all the larvae possible, and place them in 70% alcohol, and then the rest you try and kill. So we can stop that life cycle, stop them from pupating in the ground. You can do this by burning or freezing, or deeply burying the carcass itself, greater than 4 foot of compacted soils. That's a big task there. You could, if they've got a wound, you could pour diesel into the wound and burn it. You want to try and kill everything possible. After that, contact your local biologist, see what other instructions they may have for you. But if you're going to then move that infected portion, say it's a shoulder and you cut the shoulder off, You want it to be double bagged. If you suspect any larvae have entered the soil, you can remove the soil, like 2 inches of soil, 1.5 foot around the carcass. There is also an or some EPA registered pesticides for treating soil. There's nothing that nothing registered for use on carcasses. But we don't want to transport it to like a land. We don't want to leave a carcass with larvae on the landscape in general. So that they can go into the ground and pupate. Don't take them to landfills. Don't compost or render them. If possible, burn the carcass, freeze it. It needs to be froze for at least 24, 48 hours to kill the larva. But yeah, if you're transporting it anyway, you need to double bag it. No infested parts should be transported outside of an infested area. Again, this is where you contact your local Texas Parks and Wildlife biologist so they can help give you further instruction. And then non-infested parts should be thoroughly inspected prior to leaving an infested area. Texas Parks and Wildlife does not recommend eating infected animals, although, as Ron has said before, it's not considered a food safety issue, so we'll leave that decision ultimately up to you. But with that, I will take any questions if you have them.
I got a question. I was told that on average we see wildlife infections 2 to 3 times higher than domestic. I don't know if that's true, but if that's the case, why aren't we seeing any wildlife yet?
I don't know if that number is actually true. That's a challenge, and most of the monitoring goes on livestock, and it's because it's easier. You can effectively monitor them. But I've been wondering why we haven't seen anything with any whitetail yet. I have to imagine it's just because people aren't seeing the animals frequently enough, or they just get a glimpse of it. Like even in South Texas, unless you're actively a lot of those trail cameras, I don't know how many guys are checking them every single day and looking at the photos, but even that's only a small portion of the population that's going to a portion of the population that's going to your feeders. I think it's just mostly the fact that they're not easy to watch, and that's kind of the challenge with wildlife in general. Yeah, honestly, I expected a case by now. I'm surprised we haven't had one. I imagine there's plenty out there, but it just hasn't been reported or seen yet. And I think and a lot of it's probably because a lot in these areas, the landowners are ranchers, and they're probably more focused on their livestock at this point than monitoring wildlife. That's just a guess, because it's the thing they can control, right? You can't control. We can't treat deer on the landscape, so they're probably putting most of their efforts into the livestock. That would be my guess.
And then my other question was, so say the worms or the flies show up here. I was told that if we shoot anything, that it has to be buried, that the flies would infect a dead animal or a recently killed animal. Is that correct? Do we really have to bury every pig we shoot?
I do not think that's the case, that you have to bury everything. I stop sharing. I'm going to pull up this. I'm going to share again now. This is Texas Parks and Wildlife's carcass disposal and management. There's more than it's more than just burying, burning, stuff like that. What I recommend is
Marcus, you may zoom that in just a little bit, or zoom it out so we can see it a little better. It's pretty small.
It's pretty small, or is it pretty?
Yeah, it's small. You may, zoom in on it that way. There you go.
Okay. There you go. Yeah, so First off, do a thorough inspection of the animal. Check over all those mucous membranes, things like that, all the bodily orifices where there's likely to be soft tissue injuries. And then just check it over, make sure there's not an infection. If there's nothing infected, it should be fine.
Okay.
But if there is, that's when you need to try and kill. If you find a section, maybe I'd like to use the shoulder as an example, but say you have a cut on the shoulder and you open it up, you see it smells suspicious. Maybe you see a few larvae. Remove that shoulder and treat that shoulder. Burn it, freeze it, uh, pour diesel into that wound and then burn it. I think that was the old school. Ron is correct me if I'm wrong. That was the old school way of doing things, right? Is they just put diesel in some of those wounds, and that kills the larva.
I'd heard that before. Yep.
Yeah, I think I heard it from Sonia as well. So Sonia Swigert is our extension entomologist. But yeah, but this is the Texas Parks and Wildlife's official carcass document here that they put out to the public.
Okay. Yeah, we shot a bunch of hogs this weekend. Every single hog had about 100 ticks on them. I mean, we've been having huge tick overloads. I found a 2-week-old heifer with 130 ticks on her the other day. She's full anemic. I mean, she was in bad shape. But up here, our ticks are really bad this year. At least on my land. My neighbors haven't had too many issues, but I know all the hogs we shot were just absolutely covered in them this weekend. So,
yeah, and all it takes is a tick bite for them to be able to infest, right? But
yeah,
aside from that, hogs, and I'm convinced hogs are gonna get hit pretty hard on this. I hope I'm right on it
I do too. We're getting a gunship. We're getting a helicopter to go out because we can't do the numbers that we need to the way we're doing it, and the traps haven't been working the way we wanted. So
yeah, well, good luck.
I'm okay. I'm okay with the worms wiping out the hog population, and that's great.
The problem is that it's just another harbor or another thing for them to just persist on the landscape. And that's why it's so important. And Ron mentioned this. It's so important if you find a case to report it, because if you don't report it, we can't get sterile flies there because you don't know about it. And that's just if you find it in wildlife, get it reported. Hopefully we can knock it back in that area with the sterile flies. But it's all we can really do right now is we need to report so that we can get those sterile flies in.
Marcus, there was a question in the chat on about killing wildlife that has an infection. What is
so there is an authorization to take the Texas Parks and Wildlife, an authorized take that Texas Parks and Wildlife has put together. So what I would get with the local, I'm trying to basically what that'll allow is for a legal take of wildlife that has. Now this isn't just like, oh, I think it might have something, go and kill it. But I don't have all of the details on that right now.
Marcus, I'll interrupt real quick. As talking to our game warden here in Montague County, he mentioned something about that yesterday. I would say if you have a suspicion or if you have a question about that, contact your Texas Parks and Wildlife game warden and our biologist that covers that area, because they'll sure be more up to date on that deal. But I would sure check with them first and foremost, and then that way, because the game wardens, according to him, have been trained on all this now, so they're familiar with what's going on, what's happening, and be able to deal with some of these questions.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can't find an answer to something, I would get a hold of your biologist or the game warden. They're going to be up to date on all this stuff. But I do know Texas Parks and Wildlife has developed an authorized take. But I would check in with where you are, your local game warden, to get a little bit more information about that. It's been. Oh, go ahead.
I talked to our wildlife biologist the other day, and she said that if you even suspect, that you just need to send her a photo. She said, send her a photo. She'll determine if it is. And if it is, then she will tell you exactly what you need to do, whether or not you can take the animal or you need to call the game warden out. But she said to send her a photo immediately if we suspect anything, and she will then tell us what we need to do from there.
And I would argue that you probably need to be a little more aggressive than that and collect those larvae. Another question in here, Maddie, will the larvae persist to eat on dead carcasses? And if so, how long?
Yeah, so I just answered a question on this, and Ron, y'all can pop in if y'all want to as well, but in the email. But no, so they're not going to persist on like a dead carcass. If so, I think it's like an hour or so before they'll go off into the soil. But like the screwworm itself is not attracted to dead carcasses either. So that was another question I've had, where like flies, are they gonna, if you have a dead animal, are they gonna just come in because of the smell? Like, no, they're not attracted to those at all. Ron, I saw you. Oh, I thought I saw you on mute. But I think if anything, it'd be 1 to 2 hours is the number I've heard that they could be on it still.
Yeah, there was some speculation off those key deer that they were surviving a little longer than that, but I think you're right. I think the mature larvae will actually go ahead and get off the carcass and burrow into the ground. So it doesn't immediately kill the larvae, they just seek a new refuge.
I had a question on the wildlife. Some diseases you look for, there are certain symptoms that the deer are experiencing, like chronic wasting disease. Is there anything similar that people could be looking for just if they spot deer?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the wound thing, but they're going to be more lethargic. They're gonna like at some point it depends on the stage of infestation too, right? So if it's early on, probably not much, but if it's starting to affect them, which at that point you should see the wound. But head drooping, I try and stay away from head shaking. I know there's been a lot of people like calling in, it's like, oh, I'm seeing these deer head shaking. Like, I mean, deer shake their heads just to get flies away from them all the time. But just lethargic, droopy, they'll probably start. One of the challenges also is I imagine that they'll kind of move into denser areas and stuff like that. I don't know that they're going to just be out wandering around once they have this big infection, which could also be one of the reasons we're not seeing reports, is because, I mean, when you've got a gaping wound, yeah, those Florida key deer, I mean, they're like, if you don't know about that situation, these animals they're named. They're very much in the public eye. So they were able to monitor them really well. It was like having livestock, for most of them. But yeah, just any of those like typical signs, the CWD signs are actually a great one. It's just like that head drooping, the lethargic. They look out of it. They're not themselves. Was there any other that I kind of missed there, Ron, for livestock that were reported?
No, and I'm like you, a lot of the things that would probably indicate a screwworm infestation is behavior you might see from flies or something else. So just regular fly infestations, but just know what normal looks like and then try to look for anything that's abnormal. I think the isolation deal may be something we see a little bit. I know when I was a kid, that is not what we saw much. A lot of them would have these early infestations. There was no really behavioral changes in those animals if you saw it early enough. I wouldn't wait until you see something different in livestock before you actually think you might have an issue, but wildlife may be a little different.
Yeah, and I agree. I think the isolation comes later in the game whenever it's actually affecting their performance and stuff like that. But those early infections, it's probably going to be business as normal, but they might show more irritation, like they might lick back where the wound is or pay more attention to it. So something to kind of keep in mind. And those does, so I mentioned during the breeding season, I really hit on fawns, but it's also the does because like the does when they give birth, they're prone to tearing. So it can be a double whammy there. That's when we're likely to see the most negative impact on our females is during birthing season. Then of course the umbilical region of the fawn. But and this that goes to all the other species as well. Those whenever they're having young, that's when it's going to be the hardest hit on their females.
That also goes for livestock.
All right.
We see a lot of reproductive tract infestations.
So now we've had Marcus talk and we've had Ron talk, and I wanted to bring in Kevin Brasilis with Merck. He will talk a little bit about what maybe kind of fill in some of the things that we've thought of as we were sitting here. We just wanted to kind of make sure we cover a lot of different information. But I'll turn over the mic to Kevin and let him visit some as well. And keep asking in the chat. We'll kind of monitor that. Or if you need to ask a question, we'll be sure to continue there.
So a few things that we've talked about, fly control on our domesticated, our cow calf type situations. Think about as no matter if we spray them or if we use a topical to control flies, there's one spot on the cow that we always miss. And it's going to be on her belly, and that navel. You think about when we get an abundance of fly strikes and everything, the irritation that's created from those fly strikes, like on a cow's navel, is there's probably enough irritation you'll see blood at times. What I have my cow calf operations that I deal with, kind of what our plan going forward is we'll start using fly tags, and it's not one. It's going to be putting 2 tags per animal, and mainly that calf, because that calf's going to be down there nursing that mama cow. And I'm going to cover those fly tags. They're going to be rubbing on that cow's belly. And it's just to control those fly strikes at that point in time on that cow's belly. The other things, and I think Ron alluded to it, an integrated pest management program or protocol to cover the flies that we have, the flies, the ticks, and that comes multiple different ways, whether that's sprays or back rubbers. It's those things don't have an impact on the screwworm fly itself, but we control everything else that creates irritation or wound type scenarios. That's what I have most of my guys. We think about at the situations where we're putting ear tags in. Ear tags are plastic. They hold static electricity, so any dust, any contaminants from the environment stick to them. What we put in place when we're tagging animals, we're putting ear tags in is we'll mix up some chlorhexidine and water. Most of the time we run a pretty stout mix. Is 50% chlorhexidine, 50% water, and we dip that tag and the applicator all in that solution to kind of wash that dust off. Put the ear tag in, and then spray that wound with some type of wound care, whether that's a screwworm ear tick spray or Carthon 4, whatever it might be. But use some good management practices going forward. There was questions on the injection sites. Ron hit a perfect point. The days of us buying a 25-cent needle and getting 100 head out of them, and the last one that we use it on, we got to take a hammer to beat it in that skin. Those days are gone. You give a shot, change that needle multiple times from a standpoint, probably 10 head maximum on one needle. I'll go short as I've taken brand new needles out of the husk, gave a shot, and all of a sudden pull that needle out and I see blood trickle out. It's a brand new needle, but there's something not right there. Whether you got a burr on it, change out a needle, immediately. Those are the things that I see right there. From that standpoint, one thing I want to touch base on is fly drops. When we turn it in and we get a fly drop, that doesn't just help our domesticated animals, it actually helps for the wildlife from the sterile flies standpoint. Um, Ron Justin put up a deal here. The potential treatments, you have topical sprays, permethrins, the systemics, the Coumaphos, and the wound care. It's going to be very critical going forward to use the tools that are available. There's a question in the chat: will Exalt ever be at affordable rate? It is affordable when you really think about what we're dealing with from that standpoint. When you look at the cost of our animals and what that product's going to do, that's where it's going to be for right now. So that answers that question. Trying to think any other questions that y'all might have. Ron, you might chime in if I'm missing something. But those are the things I kind of wrote down here at this point in time.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that, and I know everybody looks at the cost of these products and thinks they're too high, but we need to really look at how we can incorporate them into our management system and be ready when we start having issues. So make sure you do have a good working relationship with the veterinarian, because some of these are script products, not all of them, but some of them are. And you're going to need a veterinarian to help you get access to those and to work with you through these issues. One other thing, Justin's put up this biosecurity checklist, I think was great. But once again, establish that relationship with your veterinarian, because that's going to be critical in this whole process. The other thing that we've got developed, I guess a week ago now, Justin, is the New World Screwworm Preparedness and Response Educational Module, which is a training that goes over a lot of what we talked about here, and then also the inspection component that was developed by AgriLife Extension at the request of the governor and Animal Health Commission, and it was put out I think about a week ago, and it's a really good training to go through. It's 4 hours of material right now, and this is version 1 of it. Marcus was involved in that. I kind of helped edit on some of it as well, but on the livestock side. But if you just search AgriLife Learn New World Screwworm course, that will come up in a search engine. Justin, do you have a better way of getting to that thing? And I will tell you, going through our system takes a few jumps to get there, but it's necessary. The objective of that course is to teach you what you need to know to inspect your cattle and wildlife adequately. And then there's a secondary component to it where if you successfully complete the course and a follow-up test, you can apply to be a certified inspector through Animal Health Commission. And some ranches are having their people go through that, or the manager is, so that if this ever gets widespread and we're needing to move livestock and we don't have access to animal health inspectors, these people will be trained to inspect, fill out the forms, and release cattle from those operations. Not everybody that goes through the course is going to get selected, but a lot of the guys in South Texas are certainly moving toward that, being able to manage their own future and outcome. So keep that in mind, and it's a pretty good course. It'll be better the next turnaround. Marcus, I think y'all had less than a week to put that together, and I'm amazed it got done. So just want to make everybody aware that that's out there. You'll may have heard some stuff about it coming out from the governor's office, Animal Health Commission. Just wanted you to be aware of what that course was.
And Ron, I don't know if I didn't hear it or not, but that is interstate movement only in non-quarantined areas.
No, If once it can be used in interstate along with a CVI.
Okay.
But if you're moving out of a quarantine zone and you are a certified inspector, the forms can be filled out by one of these certified inspectors coming out of this program and released for movement. And so there's going to be some teeth and some requirements from the Animal Health Commission above this course and additional training to do that. But no, it would allow you to move animals within the state as well. Now, they're not to the point of needing extra inspectors. They're doing all that themselves. But if this gets out of hand, they wanted to have a process in place that they don't stop commerce. And that's a big deal with this quarantine or movement restriction. They're not trying to make everybody just not sell cattle like some of you see on social media. They're just trying to not inadvertently spread screwworms by not doing due diligence on inspection and treatment of cattle before they or livestock before they move. So that's the best way I can say it. Marcus, have you got any better way of describing what that course is?
No, I think you did a good job, but also I want to point out that like it's the same with wildlife. Now that's going to be like pen deer, and any animal wildlife rehab stuff like that. It's going to be that's where it's going to be mostly applicable to natives. The exotics, again, that's Texas Animal Health Commission, but that's a pretty big industry, and there's a lot of movement of animals. So it falls on them, and the ultimate like requirements are going to be the same as far as like what they can't have an infection, but the effort given for your wildlife species and your exotic animals is undoubtedly going to be a little bit more, right? Just because they're wild. So it's going to be harder to inspect them, but that's just kind of the nature of the beast there. But if you're going to move them, they still need to be inspected, but they can be moved.
Yeah, I think that's the important point to remember. With due process, you can move stuff. So don't everybody think we're locking everything down. Justin just put up what pops up if you go and do the search. I said if you do search for New World Screwworm Preparedness and Response Education, that'll be what comes up. And there's a couple of steps to go through to get access to that course. And it's a pretty good course right now, but they're already starting to work on version 2 of it just to improve the flow and stuff of it. But it's worth taking. I've seen a lot of wildlife people taking the course and commenting that they got a lot of good out of it, and hopefully the livestock folks are too.
And I know I've already had one or two here in the county that have taken it and received that certification as well. So that way, like you said, it's about 4.5 hours to become certified. And I think that helps the Texas Animal Health Commission a little bit, kind of expand their net, so to say. And so we're just trying to help out with this possibility of jumping in on this.
So there's a question in the chat from the Exalt label. So the Exalt label is brought from the data that's been used in South America, Australia, Mexico. Okay, we cannot do any testing on that product as far as a reproductive claim in the United States because we didn't have screwworms in the United States to do the testing on that. So USDA and FDA put the label on there based upon the data from South America, Australia, and Mexico. Have not seen or talked to anybody in the other countries that have been using this product for 8 or 9 years that they've seen an increase to abortions or anything like that, to answer his question. And why it's not labeled for bulls is because nobody's done the test. in other countries. They don't see those issues. They don't test the same way as we do in the United States as far as USDA and FDA guidelines. So what we've got right there, we don't see issues or reproductive concerns in other countries on bulls or cows where it's been used in other countries. I'm just telling you, the label is what it is right now from that understanding, 2 months of age and older, and the breeding on bulls has not been tested.
Kevin made a good point in the chat that, even though that jug of Exalt looks like it's pretty expensive, when you look at it on a dose basis, it's not that expensive. So don't let the sticker shock keep you from using a good product if you need to.
Okay, any other questions that we may have before we wind up this meeting? And again, I appreciate Ron and Marcus and Kevin helping supply this information. It has been recorded. We can send an email out. I know somebody asked about that slide presentation that Ron made a while ago. Yes, he can share that with me, and then I can share it with everybody who requested, or I know I have a mass email group here, but I can share it if y'all request it as well. And I can put that information if you want to email me out. I'll try to pull that up here in just a minute and put it up there so you'll know my email address.
Justin, I can send you my stuff. I'll just send it in PDF form, though. That way it's like protected as like this is what it was that was presented, not altered.
Email address there in the chat if y'all can see that. And then that way y'all can send it or request PDF presentations. We can sure share that with y'all. I don't mind a bit.
I will tell you that nearly everything we talked about this morning is in that course. And so I would encourage you to take, and you don't have to go through 4 hours of it all at one time. You can work through it in the modules and stop and start anytime you need to. So that'd be a good way to have access to all this information too.
And it's a free course.
It is free, and it's got much more in it than we were able to cover this morning too.
Right.
Absolutely. And don't forget that Texas Animal Health Commission and Texas Parks and Wildlife personnel were involved in making it. So it is, and they had to review everything. So it is basically the letter of the law type of information is in there as well.
Good. And I see some of y'all punching in your emails now and sharing it with me, and we'll be sure to share that on as well. I think once we log out here, again, it'll take some time for this recording to be stored, and if y'all want it, y'all can sure request it as well, and kind of go from there. Ron, Marcus, Kevin, have y'all got any last minute things y'all want to talk about or reinvest in?
I just want everybody to really understand this is not a situation that's not manageable. Back in 1972, I think they had 90,000 cases of screwworms in the state of Texas. We're at 16 right now. And we've seen worse, we've managed worse. And if sterile fly populations are increased through the planned and currently on track plants, we'll be able to really get handle on this because we know what needs to be done. We just need to get access to the flies. So that's all in the works. And I see a lot of people saying that USDA is dragging their feet. No, they're not. This administration has worked very fast, in my opinion, given what bureaucracies are, and allocated money to get the plants built. These are biosecure level 3. plants because you cannot have a non-sterile fly getting out of one of these plants. And so it takes a little effort to build one of them and make them a biosecure level 3 plant. There's only one level higher than that, and that's the old Plum Island facility, and the one they're building in Kansas or have built in Kansas. So once again, it's a process that has to be done right. I'm not saying this couldn't have all been started earlier, but this administration has gotten on it pretty quick.
Yeah. And on the wildlife side of things, I want to kind of reiterate what Ron just said, that it was here before. White-tailed deer numbers were lower at that period, but there's a lot of reasons for that. Wildlife are pretty resilient, and a lot of these species can bounce back really quickly. So once we get the flies and start knocking them back, I expect even if we see some population declines in some areas, I expect pretty strong rebounds in a lot of our mammal species. So it's not going to wipe them out. It's just going to be something we got to deal with and alter our expectations from hunting and things like that as well, and observations.
And again, monitor, surveillance, report, all that helps you and us as a whole, because if we can stop this or mitigate it as best as possible, don't be afraid to say, hey, we've got it, or we think we've got it. And if you're not 100% sure, send some samples off. Let's be sure what we're dealing with ahead of time. All right, I guess we'll kind of wrap this up. Again, we want to thank y'all for jumping in. I think we had as high as about 60 or 70 folks jump in on this email or on this Teams, and so we appreciate that greatly. Again, if you have questions, let us know. We've shared our information out to the side, and we appreciate everything that everybody's doing, and we appreciate y'all being a part of this and wanting to be progressive in this indeed. Thank y'all. Y'all have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Justin.